Yesterday we talked about how to find the trig ratios. You can also do this in your calculator. You can find what the cosine of an angle is or the sine of the angle. Yesterday we didn't have the given angle and we just found the ratio. But if you have the angle, you can find out what the sine or the cosine or the tangent of that angle is. So we need to use your calculators. Okay? So on this calculator and on any calculator, there's two ways to measure degrees. One is in something called degrees, or two ways to measure angles. One is degrees and one is called radians. So since there's two ways, you have to make sure that your calculator is set in the correct mode. So on your calculator, and sometimes on the smaller ones, there's the mode button. Or sometimes along the bottom of your screen or the top of the screen, it will say DEG if it's already in degrees, or RAD if it's in radians. So if you need help finding that on your calculator, make sure that you ask. So on this calculator, you hit mode, and the third one down, it says radian and degree. Notice mine is highlighted on degree. If yours isn't, just go over and hit degree, and then you can quit out of the screen by hitting second and then mode, and that gets you back to the normal screen. Now the buttons that we want to use are these sine, cosine, and tangent buttons that are right here. And most of your calculators have these buttons. If they don't, you can look for a button that says trig and see if you can find it in your trig button menu. So if I wanted to find the sine of 32 degrees, like right here, all I need to do in my calculator is hit sine, and then I hit 32, and then you can close your parenthesis, and then hit enter. Okay. If you're in the wrong mode, it's not going to give you the right answer for degrees, so you have to make sure that you're in the right mode. So I'm going to round to 4 decimal places, so it's 0.5299. Okay. Let's have you try the cosine of 109 by yourself. See if you can get it correct on your calculator. Okay, let's see how you did. Cosine of 109. It should be negative 3.22 or 3256. Now notice I'm going to take this 6 here and I'm going to round up this 5 because this is bigger than 5. So it's negative 0.3256. Okay. The tangent of 67.5, I hit tangent instead of cosine or sine, 67.5. And now notice it doesn't matter that this is a decimal, it works fine. So I put it in and I get 2.414. Notice I don't round the 4 up because the 2 is less than 5, so I keep the 4 as a 4. Okay. Now we can put the information that we used yesterday, and using our calculator we can find a missing side of a triangle without having any other triangle to compare it to. So this is how we find our missing part of the triangle. So first we're going to label our hypotenuse like we did yesterday with hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. Then you want to figure out what you have and what you want. Then you're going to say to yourself, which trig function has those two pieces of information? So then you set it up so you have the trig function, so sine, cosine, or tangent of the angle that you have, so like 38 degrees, and then your given over your want, or your want over your given, depending on what you have. Okay? Then you try and get the variable by itself. So we'll look at how to do that on some specific examples. So let's take a look at our first example. This angle is 70, so we're going to label according to this angle. Remember, across from the 90-degree angle is the hypotenuse. And then across from the angle given, so across from 70, is the opposite. Okay? And next to the 70 is adjacent. Now notice that I have the adjacent, number 9, is labeled. So you're looking for the piece of information with the number that you have. So my 9 is the length of the side, and that's with my adjacent, and I want the opposite. So I want to think to myself, which two, or what goes with adjacent and opposite. So I have adjacent, and I want opposite. So in your SOHCAHTOA or some will be caught another hippie tripping on acid, I want to figure out which one has adjacent and opposite. Well, if we look up here, adjacent and opposite is tangent. So I'm going to set this up as the tangent of the angle. Notice we have the angle today, so I put 70 degrees equals the opposite, which is x, over the hypotenuse, which is 9. Well, if I want to get the x by itself, I have to get rid of dividing by 9. You get rid of dividing by 9 by multiplying by 9 on both sides. So now I have 9 tangent 70 equals x. So now I just put this in my calculator. So if I do 9 tangent, and you can put a multiply sign, you don't have to, and then our angle of 70 degrees. And I get 24.727. So x is, we're rounding to 2 decimals, so 24.73, because it was 727, so since the 7 is bigger than 5, I'm going to round up the 2 to a 3. Okay? So, on the next example, this is the angle that we're given, so we want to label it according to that. So I'm going to find my hypotenuse first, across from the 90-degree angle is the hypotenuse, and then next to the angle is the adjacent, and then across from the angle that we're looking at is the opposite. Okay, so now I have this labeled like we did yesterday. So I want to think, what do I have and what do I want? So I have the 14, length of 14, so I have the hypotenuse, and I want the adjacent. So then I think to myself, if I have the hypotenuse and I want the adjacent, what goes with hypotenuse and adjacent? So I look back up here, hypotenuse and adjacent is going to be our cosine. So I do cosine of the angle, which is 27, equals adjacent over hypotenuse, so x over 14. So to get the x by itself, I need to get rid of multiplying, or I need to get rid of dividing, so I need to multiply. So I multiply both sides by 14. So I have 14 cosine 27 equals x. So I put this in my calculator, so 14 cosine 27, forgot the number, and I get 12.47. So since the next number is 4, it's less than 5, so I'm going to keep the 7 as it is, so 12.47. Okay. Our next one, I have, this is our given angle, so across from the 90-degree angle is the hypotenuse, across from the given angle is the opposite, and this is adjacent. So I want to look at what I have and what I want. So I have the 30, so I have the hypotenuse, and I want the opposite. So I think to myself, what goes with hypotenuse and opposite? Well, look up here. Hypotenuse and opposite is going to be our sine. So the sine of our angle of 64 degrees equals opposite, which is x, over hypotenuse, which is 30. Okay. So to get the x by itself, I multiply by 30 on both sides. So I have 30 sine 64 equals x. So in my calculator, I do 30 sine 64, and I get 26.96. Okay. Let's take a look at the next problem. It's a little bit different. Then I'll have you try one on your own. Okay, we're still going to start off the same exact way. We're going to label. So across from the 90 degrees is the hypotenuse. Next to the angle that we have is adjacent, and across from the angle is opposite. Okay, so I want to think, what do I have and what do I want? I kind of crossed out on my adjacent. I accidentally covered up the fact that that was a 7, I think. Yeah, 7. And then this was the x value. So I have the adjacent and I want the hypotenuse. So if I look back, the adjacent and the hypotenuse is with cosine. So I'm going to set up my problem in a similar manner. So the cosine of my angle of 48 degrees is adjacent, 7, over the hypotenuse, which is x. Now on the previous 3 problems, notice that our x was always on top. Okay? Now in this problem, the x is in the denominator. You can't solve for the x in the denominator, so I want to get it in the top or the numerator. So I'm going to multiply both sides by x, like what we had done before. So I have x cosine of 48 equals 7. Well, now if I want the x by itself, there's an unsaid multiply sign right here, so I want to get rid of the multiplying by dividing. So I do cosine, dividing by cosine of 48 on both sides. Okay. So in my calculator, you do 7, then the divide by button, and then cosine of 48, close my parenthesis, and I hit enter. So x is 10.46. Okay, let's see if you can set up the next one and solve it. Pause the video, try it by yourself, and let's see how you do. Okay, let's see how you ended up with doing it all by yourself. So this is the hypotenuse because it's across from the 90-degree angle. This is next to the angle, so it's adjacent, and across from the angle is opposite. So I have the opposite and I want the hypotenuse. So opposite and hypotenuse goes with sine. So I set up sine of 59 equals opposite over hypotenuse. Notice our x is in the denominator again, so I'm going to multiply both sides by x. So I have x sine 59 equals 4. So to get the x by itself, I have to divide by sine of 59. So in your calculator, you do 4 divided by sine of 59. And I get x is 4.67 because the next number is 6, so I round it up. Okay, hopefully you got that. So the keys for tonight is to make sure that you label your sides, that you figure out what you want and what you have, or want and have are the same thing. We figure out what you have and what you're missing. No, want and have are not the same thing. It's early. I'm struggling. Figure out what you want and what you have, and then you set it up. You figure out which sine, cosine, or tangent you're going to use with that. So you do sine, cosine, or tangent of the angle. Then you do it over what you have or want, or vice versa, and then you solve to get the x value by itself. Okay, and that's all we're doing for tonight. This is Square Rooter signing off.